In Washington state next month, referendum 88, and if it's passed, it would essentially bring affirmative action back to Washington state.
And so this was a highly controversial issue when the state banned affirmative action back in 1998, and bringing it back, you could say, is now just as controversial. What is referendum 88 for anyone who might not know?
I don't think anybody could look at the world today and believe that we're all equal, or there's not the need for some kind of consideration to close the gap. It's without quotas, it's without allowing lesser qualified people to be selected, but it's really giving us a tool to get the greatest diversity that we have.
For your tenure as governor, there was no affirmative action in Washington state. Why do you feel that it's important to bring it now, after we've gone 20 years, arguably becoming even more diverse than we've ever been?
I thought this was a decent way to have common sense without quotas, to make sure that we looked at everybody's talent. We want everybody's talent to be pulling on the rope in Washington, so I thought this made sense. So we'll see what the voters say. One way or another, though, we're going to continue the effort to give everybody opportunity in Washington.
Here was the ballot title for R88. Initiative 1000 would allow the state to remedy discrimination for certain groups and to implement affirmative action without the use of quotas or preferential treatment, as defined, in public education, employment, and contracting. Ballot titles drive debates. So the debate was not a reprise. It was not a rerun of I-200. The debate on referendum 88 is, does it even use preferences? Does it even use quotas? And I think Yvonne showed demonstrably that it set up the very architecture for mandating and enforcing quotas. I love what Slade Gorton, former 3-term Attorney General before he became a 3-term U.S. Senator, said. He said, it's the most deceptive ballot title I have ever seen. He said, the ballot title denies what the initiative requires.
Voters opted to get rid of affirmative action in 1992, but now there's a push to bring it back. Here's a look at the numbers so far. It is just way too close to call.
It's sort of like the elephant in the room that with the initiatives kind of coming out how they did, it's going to pose some issues to this, and I think there's going to have to be maybe some workarounds, but I don't. To me, that only just strengthens the imperative of what we're doing, and that we really do need to to push this over the line and get this done.
One way or another, though, we're going to continue the effort to give everybody opportunity in Washington.
So despite the voters of Washington state voting against implementing affirmative action on the level of the state government, especially with regards to contract work, government hiring, and educational opportunities, the voters voted on that with regards to referendum 88. They voted against that, but because this Office of Equity was already in the works, the Senate, just last week on January 20th, 2020, voted on whether or not to implement this Office of Equity Task Force, which would basically be an agency that oversees every other agency's equity work. Now, they don't actually define what equity is in this office or with regards to this office, but they vote on it anyways. The following footage is from the floor vote and the different amendments that the Republican minority proposed to restrain the power of this Office of Equity. So let's just go through those different amendments.
The lady from the 29th District, Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I moved to adopt the striker numbers 964.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 964 be adopted. Amendment to the amendment, amendment number 1006, clerk will read.
The first amendment to come to the floor is a very broad amendment that seeks to restrain the power of the office on a number of different vectors. I'll just read through some of these vectors. It adds the requirement that the office must not assist agencies in applying an equity lens to hiring, staffing, or workforce management decision-making, and it prohibits the office and agencies from developing policies and mechanisms that result in hiring preferences based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin. Basically, this tries to implement a no affirmative action policy within the Office of Equity.
What this amendment does is it clarifies and simplifies and brings into alignment with the will of the people so recently expressed that will make the underlying bill better public policy, fairer to all Washingtonians, and compliant with the will of our voters.
And here's the argument against this amendment.
I appreciate what the good gentleman in the 19th is talking about in regarding honoring the will of the voters. Unfortunately, this legislation actually is actually illegal. Right now, we, under law, we don't have any hiring preferences, so I would say no to this amendment.
So if I may be so bold as to try to interpret the good lady's argument against this amendment, is that she is saying that it's already illegal to enforce any sort of hiring quotas. Well, what else is the Office of Equity actually going to do? Whether you call it a quota or not, whether it's illegal or not to do this thing, this is what they're going to do. But they don't want to say explicitly that that is what they're not doing, or that's what they're not going to do. Because to state it explicitly would be, one, illegal, and two, highlight that they're up to some shady business.
As many as are in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The amendment fails. Amendment 1008. Clerk will read.
The effect of Amendment 1008 is that it requires that the Director of the Office of Equity be jointly selected by the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader of the Senate, and the Minority Leaders of the House and Senate. Basically, this provides some measure of oversight from the minority who's in power, or who's not so much in power right now. And here's the argument for this amendment.
The subject of equity is something that affects all of us in this state, and when it comes to recognizing different opinions, different ideas, it's something that should rest with more than just the decision of one person. So the idea behind this amendment is that it requires the Director of the Office of Equity be jointly selected by the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader of the Senate, and the Minority Leaders of the House and Senate. I'm urging a yes vote.
And here's the argument against this amendment.
This potentially could, by having this joint appointment, could create a tie vote, and there are no other directors currently at this time that are appointed in this way.
There's no other office in all of the land that has this much power over every other office in the land. So, of course, the minority is going to want to have some oversight in place over that office that has oversight over every other office.
As many as are in favor say aye. Opposed, no? No! The amendment fails. Amendment 1009.
The effect of Amendment 1009 is that it limits the total full-time employees for the Office of Equity to 6 full-time employees.
I speak today on behalf of a constituent from my district, Ms. Carrie Hannon, who took the time to come out to our Office of Equity Task Force meeting in Yakima. We held hands around the circle with folks from all across the state, all walks of life, reflective of what the underlying intent of this bill is. And Ms. Hannon expressed a very important concern, and that is she wants to make sure that when this Office of Equity stands up, because she does want to see it eventually stood up, that there is not a politically correct police department inside of this office.
We are trying to ensure that as we move forward, that equity is not always something negative. We want to make sure that we're trying to move, kind of what Dr. Johnson is saying, moving towards the positive in acknowledging people who are doing the work right instead of always glaring the people who are doing the work wrong. What do we do further on this task force? Now we start transforming people's minds in words and concepts.
And by limiting the number of FTEs, we can accomplish that, because under the version that the task force would like to see, Mr. Speaker, there are 26 full-time employees, including 4 with enforcement authority. And that 4 enforcement authority is duplicative of what already happens in the Human Rights Commission and in other organizations.
This is the piece that I get questioned on every time I bring this office up. Everybody believes that there should be this office, but they don't want to fully commit until they know that we are not repeating what we have done in this country with 8 civil rights acts. and still we are in the same place. So this piece is critical. They want to know, how do we really hold people accountable? How do we really enforce this? Because we've had stuff. We've had an equal opportunity office. We've had all of this stuff, yet we're still back in this room to come back again and put another policy forward.
So on behalf of Carrie Hannon from the 15th District, Mr. Speaker, I ask you to limit this to the 6 FTEs that are currently in the striker and not allow this to expand into another animal that is not what this body intends to move forward today.
I want to make sure that we honor the voices that definitely asked to not hinder the work when standing up the Office of Equity, and by limiting it to 6, that would definitely do that. I stand up here saying no to this amendment.
Her argument against it is that they don't want to have any obstructions to total power. It's like, at least they're honest. We can give them that, right?
As many as are in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. The amendment fails. Amendment 1002, the clerk will read.
The effect of Amendment 1002 is that it changes the establishment date of the Office of Equity from July 1st, 2020 to July 1st, 2021.
As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the report that we were tasked to complete is not even done yet, and it won't be done until July of 2020. So I think we're a little premature, Mr. Speaker, in setting this office into place before this body has even had an opportunity to read the report. There's a movement. There are some who would like to bring people down instead of lifting everybody up. And Mr. Speaker, we need to make sure that we are lifting everybody up and we are ensuring equitable treatment of all people in this state.
Quite truthfully, with the rudeness that we see in some other children, I'm not quite sure I want our black children to be parity with unmannerable children. So I'm not quite sure of parity, because you see, even if we reach parity in some of these outcomes, the outcome is still not where we want to be.
So, Mr. Speaker, I urge adoption of this amendment so that we can make sure that this body has time to consider all the facets of a new government office, a new government agency, before we proceed, set it up, and unleash it on the people of Washington State.
This money has been budgeted in the governor's office. This is something that we've been waiting for a very long time. So to put this off for another year would not work on behalf of the collaboration and all the work that's been done.
This is another non-argument. Actually, most of her arguments are non-starters whatsoever. They're non-starters. She says that they've already been waiting on this and they already have the money to do this. So why would we not do what we're already saying that we're going to do, despite what the voters want us to do or not do? So there's no argument. And here's the vote.
As many as are in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. The amendment fails. Amendment 1003. The clerk will read.
The effect of Amendment 1003 is that it terminates the Office of Equity and Community Advisory Board to 10 years after their creation. It eliminates the entire act on June 30th, 2031. Here's the argument for this.
I have seen many times where agencies have been created and things have been put in place with no real accountability about how effective they've been. By sunsetting this bill, this office, it would actually require them to come back with a report to the legislature. If they're being effective, then there may not be a need for this office. And if not, we'll actually know what kinds of tweaks to make to it.
For me, anyway, the ideal would be that this work is fully integrated into the work of every agency, and that it be so integrated that someday we don't need an Office of Equity.
In reality, we need to be careful when we say in this task force that one day we might not need this office, right? We know through our filter that's what we really want in our hearts, but we do have people out there that will take that information and find a way to say that this work is already done and we don't need this office anymore, when in reality it's going to be here for a while, because this did not happen overnight.
Oftentimes there are times where we clean up things and we continue to work on making sure that government is efficient. In this case, it's taken us hundreds of years to get to this place today. I would urge a no vote.
Just because something took a long time doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good thing. Like, one local example, Mount Rainier, which is right next to Seattle, it's supposed to blow up any time now. It's taken a long time to get to a place where it might blow up. Mount St. Helens, which is just a bit south from here, that took a long time before it blew up again. The amount of time or effort that something takes does not equate whether or not it's good. What she's basically, it's not even an argument, what she's basically signaling is that they are already going to do this. She's pointing out the momentum of this bill, not whether or not it's a good idea, but whether or not it's going to happen, because they've already decided that it's going to happen. And if you listen to the vote, you can tell that this is always going to happen, at least according to the majority in the Washington State Senate.
Seeing none, the question for the House is the adoption of Amendment 1003. As many as are in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The amendment fails.
Well, there's one more amendment that has to do with disaggregated data. I can't even say the word, disaggregated data.
I would be thinking about something that's either dastardly and bold, like revolutionizing our approach to information, or some others maybe more appropriate businessy term. But disaggregating data is such a small part of it. I think there's also the issue of who names what's collected and who interprets it, and how that information is used. And so I just, in terms of the idea of placeholders for something that might be really evergreen about our understanding of how to recapture the process of things like data and information, I would suggest that'd be a bolder category.
The fact is the bill as it currently sits without this amendment seeks to predefine the type of reporting that will come out of the committee, and there are great communities right now speaking up that are telling us they feel that if the data is prescribed before it's produced and reported on, is already prescribed, it disenfranchises them even more.
I appreciate what the good gentleman in 26 is saying in regards to making sure that this office is able to use the data, use it appropriately to identify the disparities and work through the lens of equity. Unfortunately, this amendment doesn't go far enough, so I stand here with requesting for the no vote.
Further remarks? Gentleman from the 26th District, Representative Young.
I would just offer that our side is willing to pull the bill down and readjust the amendment to make it go far enough so that we can guarantee that this bill actually is equitable to every ethnic and racial minority. Thank you.
As many as are in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The amendment fails.
We're going to go into the final arguments, which I will intersplice cleverly or not so cleverly with actual footage from the people who designed this Office of Equity Task Force.
Now the question for the House is the striking amendment as amended. As many as are in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. And goes second substitute House Bill 1783 on third reading and final passage. Remarks. The lady from the 33rd District, Representative Gregerson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for hearing this very important bill. It was in 2008 when I was a new elected, and it was the first time that I had read a health impact report. And this was published by the Department of Health. And at that time, it talked about the built environment, jobs, education, access to variable transportation choices. And through that became predictable outcomes. Those predictable outcomes through equations all of a sudden made me realize that the life expectancy in the zip code that I live, in the city that I live in, I was assumed to live 10 years less than those in the same county as mine. So you can imagine, as a newly elected official, this became a very big deal for me, and I needed to understand what that meant. So fast forward that 10 years later, and in 2018, the Governor's Interagency of Council of Health Disparities had just finished a 2-year report. And in that report, they have a quote. May I read, Mr. Speaker?
Please continue.
Thank you. Currently, there are state agency programs implementing best practices, and others are testing new strategies to promote equity. However, this work is fragmented and inconsistent across state government. The Council believes that a comprehensive, enterprise-wide approach to intentional intentionally consider equity in government policies, programs, and decisions is needed for enduring change to actually occur. So I want to recognize and applaud a lot of the different things that have been happening in state agencies, such as the work of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. They're doing great things, but a lot of that is actually inward facing. The state is prepared and ready to take the next step towards equity in state government. The state needs to have strong leadership. That means that the director must be at the cabinet level and advising the governor. That means that we need to codify this for permanency. This is a promise to all the agencies that doing this work and the constituents that we serve. And the resources. We fund our values. For example, if we have communities in Eastern Washington and they need us, we need to come up with an action plan, and we need to fund that and make that an issue. And data. We all know that data is one of the biggest topics of this time. And we need to ensure that what we do with it, we're doing it together, and that we know how to collect it, and then we track it, and of course, we disaggregate it the way that we need to in order to understand what's happening. But last but not least is accountability. We can't operate in a unified way if we don't have all of the agencies working together. And we certainly can't continue to have the trust of this office if the communities won't buy in. Today, we are ready to implement the next step, and that's to start the Office of Equity.
The lady from the 29th District, Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the good lady from the 33rd for her tireless work on this important piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, I represent a district with great parity that has highly diverse population, but yet we have twice the average rate of preventable hospitalizations. And why is that? Because we are considered to be in the red zone. And what does that mean? We have low birth weights. We have high blood pressure. We have heart disease. We actually die 8 years earlier than 10 minutes across I-5. What does this do to the residents' health in my district? The other issue is the 29th has one of the lowest rate of voter participation. These facts alone speak to the need for a state equity office to examine what is happening systematically that is causing so many disparities. Mr. Speaker, Washington State needs to have a coordinated plan to address systematic inequities. I was appointed during the interim to be on that very task force that the good gentleman from the 15th speaks of. And what I know and what I experienced on that task force was great minds coming together, from the commissions to the governor's office to public comments. And they all wanted the same thing.
We have other executive orders which set benchmarks for the hiring of persons with disabilities and for veterans, but we have no such benchmark for the hiring of people who identify in the LGBTQ community.
As a state, we should be following these models, equipping diverse businesses and CBOs with the economic and social resources needed in order to combat these disparities.
We're not qualified to sell cannabis anymore, which it just seems ridiculous to me. I think that somehow this state has to find a way to repair the damage that was done. I think that the rest of the country is watching us. We were one of the first states to legalize recreational cannabis, and other states are watching what we do. And really, we should be leading the way in diversity. I know that I-200 limits the language as far as quotas and all that, but there has to be some kind of measurable language in this to have it carry any weight, other than just being, eloquent talk. There has to be some kind of bones to this thing.
The social equity and restorative justice measures that the opportunities to get more black and brown folks who were destroyed tremendously on the war on drugs be able to get an opportunity not just to sell the product, not just to be out front holding a sign up for a store, but actual ownership. Because ownership means everything.
I love to see this task force have the full discretion or somewhat of discretion to actually allocate those funds to ensure so that we can mandate that the community is receiving funding to have those programs implemented. So in order for this task force to really be effective in my eyes, just a native here of Washington State, an activist for my community, I'd really love to see those enforcement and mandate measures to support this task force. Thank you.
Thank you for being an activist.
And I believe that that task force did their job. They came up with great accountability and measurement. Of course, I was on that subgroup. But Mr. Speaker, this is an important piece of legislation that I think that all legislators need to continue to be equitable and the nation's leader. Mr. Speaker, may I read a quote from the famous Dr. Martin Luther King?
Please continue.
We must come to see that the end we seek in a society of peace with itself, a society that can live with its conscience. Mr. Speaker, I urge a yes vote on this very, very important piece of legislation. Thank you.
Further remarks? The lady from the 10th District, Representative Smith. The gentleman from the 8th District, Representative Clippert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I tried to sit here and say nothing, but could no longer. July 4th, 1776. 56 men gathered and they agreed on a document that they all would sign. And the first line of that document was so important that they put it at the very first. And in that first line they said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men," and I believe in my heart they may implied women too, all men and all women, all are created equal.
The other one that I had a question on is in the vision statement, and I don't mean to go down a rabbit hole, I just want to throw this out there. The word everyone strikes me a little because we are still dealing with all men are created equal. Nobody ever we're still trying to define that, what that means, we're assuming. So everyone, I'm looking at it through those terms, and I'm just throwing it out there.
They did that because there was a domineering government that decided some people are more equal than others. And they gathered together at the risk of their own peril to say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Mr. Speaker, last year we heard a bill like this in the Judiciary Committee. Many people spoke. A man with skin much darker than my own spoke in opposition to that bill that day. And I saw a recorded message from him afterwards where he said, equality, yes. Equity, no. Why? Because that empowers government to make a decision on maybe it's school, maybe it's a job, that some people in some situations based on a numbers game are more equal than others.
The lady from the 28th District, Representative Kilduff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And standing today to offer some closing words from our side and standing in strong support of House Bill 1783. And I stand as well with great excitement about this proposal around its nuts and the bolts of it, the policies and systems that we will be taking a harder, longer, stronger look at. But perhaps most exciting about this legislation is its vision, the vision for fairness, the vision, yes, for equality, but also a vision for equity. What can we do, according to this vision, to improve the lives of Washingtonians across our state? How can we do what we do better and apply an equity lens to our work? And let's also ask the question, who is not at the table? What voices are not being heard? And this bill gets more voices into the discussion around the work that we do across our state. That makes our government all the more accountable to the people that we serve. Mr. Speaker, I've stood before on this floor and said this, that we are one Washington, and we are one Washington of many diverse communities. So I ask you, Mr. Speaker, for one Washington and the many diverse communities that we represent, that you vote yes. Yes for fairness, yes for equality, and yes to advance equity across our state.
Further remarks? Member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How do you hold a bureaucracy accountable when you haven't even defined its fundamental purpose yet? Now, one of the problems that we have with this bill, and one of the reasons to vote no for it, is the task force report, which will define, for the purposes of this new bureaucracy, the term equity hasn't been delivered yet.
So I have a question for the legislators here. How critical is it for our preliminary report to actually have a definition of equity? I am a little uncomfortable changing our definition from what the community has seen. I'm really uncomfortable about that.
Equity is the most difficult word we will ever try to define, live up to, and make happen. That's courtesy of Tana Engdahl, spiritual leader with the Cowlitz tribe, at our meeting in Vancouver.
So we're not really sure what this term means, what terms like fairness, what terms like equality, for the purposes of this agency, even mean.
We really want disrupt and dismantle. That says it all. We could just put equity equals disrupt and dismantle, right? Because we know what that means. Is it really about redistribution of this power that's entrenched in the system? Period. Right?
We have to ask ourselves questions, Mr. Speaker. Why, after 30 years of one-party rule in this state, do we need so desperately a new bureaucracy to measure the performance of existing bureaucracy? If the existing offices and commissions that have been working for decades to improve people's lot in the state aren't effective, why should we create more agency to oversee them? That's only mapping non-productive activity.
This sounds so much like what Dr. Johnson was talking about just a minute ago, about through this work, the Office of Equity should model practices in decolonizing boards and other government structures by identifying and dismantling culture-bound rules and decorum, time requirement, education, and what we call expertise.
Look, I don't doubt that the intent behind this bill and this new agency is well-meaning and well-intended. But does this new bureaucracy deliver any appreciable good? Well, Mr. Speaker, we can't even answer that question, because we don't know what the mission of this bureaucracy is yet. We've made a number of well-intended proposed amendments here that would make this new bureaucracy more accountable, more transparent, and more effective for the people of Washington. If those amendments had been accepted, we might have been to a place where we could support this new office. But they weren't. And so for now, for the sake of accountability, for the sake of transparency, and for the sake of the best interests of individuals and small businesses all around our state, I'm asking for a no vote on this bill. Thank you.
Seeing none, the question before the House is final passage of engrossed second substitute House Bill 1783. The Speaker is about to open the roll call machine. The Speaker has opened the roll call machine. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Speaker is about to lock the roll call machine. The Speaker has locked the roll call machine. The clerk will take the record, please.
Mr. Speaker, there are 56 yeas, 41 nays, 1 excused.
Having received the constitutional majority, engrossed second substitute House Bill 1783 is declared passed.
In sum, to repeat myself, the Washington state government is denying the will of the people. They openly admit that they don't care what the people think. They are going to implement equity.
One way or another, though, we're going to continue the effort to give everybody opportunity in Washington.
I don't know if the powerless will be empowered by this so much as the power hungry will have a field day with all the power that they're given via this, all the trainings that are going to come through the pipes via this, all of the redistribution of power, resources, and moral authority that is going to come down the pipes because or through this Office of Equity. Stay tuned as I rifle through the legislator. I didn't know that the legislature is basically the Evergreen State College writ large with everybody wearing suits. I mean, it's not as bad as the Evergreen State College, but there's a lot of similarity between the administration of the Evergreen State College and the ruling party of the Washington State Legislature. So I have a lot of material. Stay tuned. This is Benjamin Boyce signing off. Have a good night.